Aloha, namaste. This is Radha, and I'm here to talk about our sun's movement into Leo. We have been sitting with both Mercury and Venus in Leo for the last few weeks, and now we have the sun in his own sign. And this is really going to amp up our level of power and authority and leadership. Mercury and Venus are relational planets, as I've been discussing in my previous videos. And that level of Leo energy where we kind of come in and dominate a situation is not necessarily conducive to those planets, where we're wanting to be more compromising and more amicable. But when the sun is in his own sign, we really start to download our power from source itself. And we feel empowered and we feel clear in the ways in which we are leading and the ways in which we are holding that space. So I'm going to show us our screen here, and we can see we still have Mercury retrograde moving into the same space as the sun. So Mercury here is at 4 degrees and the sun has just moved in. This is the 16th of August. And we have Mercury moving apparently backwards, not actually backwards, into our sun. They're going to cross paths here, and then Mercury will go back into Cancer. The sun is still in what we call the gandanta point. This is the place between the water signs and the fire signs where we don't have a specific nakshatra or star that is guiding us from one place to the next. Aslesha, where we ended in Cancer, is kind of about clinging and this energy where we are really attached to our feelings and we're really attached to being the control that we have or don't have, that we can feel we don't have over that which we love, like a child. In Magha, we have this break and we're suddenly here in this realm of the ancestors. Magha is ruled by the Pitris, and we are able to kind of access that information from the predecessors, the people who've walked before us on Earth, within our specific lineage, within our family, the ways in which we have resourced power in the preceding line before us. And this can be a very, very potent place for us to sit in meditation, to sit in places that feel like power spots for ourselves, and to really remember from where we come. And this is also going to entail remembering some of the ways in which perhaps our lineage or our family has misused power. Perhaps we reflect upon our parents or our grandparents or just the culture that we come from and the ways in which power has been used, and whether or not that is true power. Because the mark of true power has to be that it's inherent. It has to be that it's coming from this connection to source, and that it's not something we need to use to dominate or overpower other people. We shouldn't need to exert our power so much as it embody it. And we have to remember, where did our power come from? It didn't come from holding something really tight. And it didn't necessarily work out the way our ancestors thought it would. So we need to tune into that lineage, that line of power that gets passed from one generation to the next, and see, where did it go awry? Where did it go wrong? And how can we be more embodied in our power without needing to exert, without needing to be dominating, but being able to just exude power by our very essence. And of course, right now it's a little shaky because I'm making this video on the 16th when he's just moved in. But if you look, we can move even just one day later to the same time as kind of late in the afternoon here in Hawaii. We have the sun now out of the gandanta point. It's 1 degree from the end of Cancer to 1 degree to the beginning of Leo, that this gandanta point is really present. And then we start to move into the stronger qualities of Magha. And as we sit with our power and as we sit with the places in which we resource our power, we need to remember that all lines lead to source, right? We're not getting our power from our father or from our father's father or from, the king of our kingdom. We're getting our power from our connection to source. And that's how we know what to do next, how to lead the ship. And of course, it begins with our power within ourselves. How are we leading our own world? How are we leading our own little, being, our mind, our emotions, our relations, our communication, our actions, our commitments? How are we doing with all of that? Because the sun is the one leading all these other planets, right? They're all circling around it. And then from there, we can start to note how we take power in other situations. And of course, for each of us, it's going to be really different. It's going to depend on what house Leo is for you and where you hold your power as a result of that. If you're a Leo Lagna, if Leo's your rising sign, then it's your identity. It's your body, it's your personality, it's everything about you is that source of power. If you're a Taurus Lagna, then it's going to be more related to your home and your heart and your motherhood, whether you're a mother or whether you're thinking of your own mother or whatever place you are in life with that. Obviously, if you are in relation to a mother in some way, it might come up in that way, but it's really about your inner peace and your home and your heart and your connection to that heart and that connection to your peace. So I do these breakdowns for each of the 12 signs in my Cosmically Aligned Patreon group, where I discussed that in this week's report. I discussed what is the sun in Leo for you? How's that showing up for you? But of course, the sun is not by himself, right? We've got Mercury retrograding here, running right into the sun. And we have Venus here also still. So Mercury is going to be exact with our sun on the 18th. We're going to have the sun and Mercury joined together 2 days after the sun moves in, because Mercury is moving in that apparent retrograde motion and he's moving back towards Cancer. So the 18th could be an interesting day because we're going to have this energy of stepping into our power. And at the same time, our communication is still backed up. Some of the ways in which we express ourselves are delayed, maybe a little confused, and we're questioning, because the retrograde allows us to take that pause and listen. Now, this is actually empowering for Mercury to be in retrograde because he's not in very good dignity. He's not in very good intelligence in Leo. The retrograde motion allows us to stop and say, actually, should I be speaking authoritatively on a subject that I don't know that much about? Or should I really be using my words to lord over other people? Perhaps there's a better way to say this. So it gives us a lot of cause to kind of take a slow down. But the conjunction with the sun is also putting us in a situation where we call this combust. The sun and Mercury are joined, and it can overpower our sense of being heard at all. We're already not being heard that well because Mercury is retrograde and the actual lines of communication are not working that well. And so now with the sun joining, we might feel like authority figures in our lives, whether that's, a boss or your parents or the government or, something that holds some sort of power over you in any given situation, is not listening to you. Your words are not being heard. Now, this can be a very powerful place for Mercury, because then we step in even deeper and say, okay, well, I'm not being fully heard, and perhaps I'm not expressing myself in my best ways possible, or perhaps there's some other reason, like communication's been lost, that I'm not experiencing what I want to be experiencing in this moment. And so it gives us more fodder for what we're learning in our Mercury retrograde cycle. But of course, it might not feel great as we move forward through it. It's a short moment in time, this 18th, and then we have the next day is the 19th. And this is later in the day, but this is, going to be our full moon. So we're going to have the moon directly across from our sun, sometime a little bit more in the morning time here in Hawaii. And we'll see Mercury heading into that gandanta point now, and really going all the way back into Cancer to see the source of our feelings and the source of where we're clinging in our communication. How are we using our words, not just to express our truth or our vulnerability, but actually to control other people or to keep something the way we want it to be. So this is a tricky, a tricky spot that we're in this moment. But as the sun continues to move forward, we'll feel ourselves stepping more and more into that power and more into our authority that comes from our connection to source, that comes from our connection to truth, which is really the most important thing. Our capacity to know and understand truth on a really high level, where we feel no lack of certainty about what that is and why we're doing what we're doing, why we're leading ourselves first and foremost, and then anyone else that's in our realm of leadership in any given direction. So again, it's going to be very important to know where the sun is showing up in your life and what Leo is in your life already. Where do you show up in your power? Where do you exert yourself? And we can also see that Mars is giving this one-way gaze, one-way drishti. We have Mars giving a 4-house drishti to Venus, who's in her own star of Purva Falguni. Mars is in his own star of Mrigashira. So Mars in Taurus is not necessarily the happiest, and Venus is not necessarily the happiest in Leo, but in their own star, they're going to operate with a little bit more intention because they're going to feel a little more met. And so in Mrigashira, we've just moved out of this sort of Jupiter-Mars Yuddha, this war that we had earlier in the week, and Mars is now crossed out of Rohini. And whatever frustrations we felt, whatever naivete we felt, whatever ways in which we felt like we were being, used or abused or, not being respected fully, our energy might be to kind of cut out and go and find ourselves in new values and new ways of seeing the world. And that might include, separating ourselves in some ways from what we've known, from the security that we've known, whether that's our family, whether that's our possessions, whether that's our immediate surroundings, wanting to go searching, because Mrigashira has that nature of searching, and it moves into Gemini, where we really start to go with our mind into other realms and use that ego identity to find something different. But right now he's still here in Taurus, and Venus is in Purva Falguni, where it's good to be a king, where we feel some happiness and pleasure and joy out of our position of authorities. And particularly in relationship, where Venus struggles in Leo, because we want to be admired, we want to be respected, we want to be looked up to, and we feel like, we're not getting all the attention we need. And why isn't everyone just doing what we want them to do? There's this sort of controlling nature that's very different than the Cancerian control, where we're wanting to almost manipulate the control. With Venus and Leo, we're often exerting our control over other people. If you don't do what what I want you to do, then I'm going to do this. And in Purva Falguni, we're able to take more of the pleasure, the enjoyment, the affection, the fun of Leo's energy, because there's that real playful quality to Leo. It's the natural 5th house. It's where we're able to enjoy the spoils of the kingdom. And so the two of this drishti coming on here can really highlight our passion and the fun that can come from that, as well as some of the anger and quick to make choices and quick to cut things off and things like that can come up. So again, that will really depend on what Mars is for you and what Venus is for you. It's going to be very different for each of us. And then then the sun will eventually move into Purva Falguni also, and we'll have to be careful that our, and I'll look and see what data is, that our source of, here we have exact drishti of Mars on Venus, and we have Mercury back in Cancer. So the 22nd is going to be powerful for that, with Mars giving that exact drishti onto Venus and Mercury back in Cancer, and in the gandanta point where we're feeling back into the ways in which we've used our emotions, perhaps to hold other people in our communication, the ways in which we're not expressing ourselves clearly and our vulnerability, and instead really trying to attach to things and hold them there. And the Mars on Venus conjunction can really potentially cut us off in some ways. And it can have us cut things off, particularly because at this point you can see Venus is in Uttara Falguni, where we make contracts and agreements with people, and there can be an energy of cutting off any agreements that we have if we're not careful. But let's continue to move forward, and I'll talk about the full moon in another video on that, so I don't want to make this too long. But I just want to see where the sun moves into Purva Falguni, which is, looks like it's on the 30th. It might have happened earlier on the 29th. Right, we have it on the 29th. Well, it's pretty much on the 30th here, like very early in the morning on the 30th, the sun moves into Purva Falguni. And this is where we might get too caught up in the spoils of being a king and use that power in ways to just get ourselves more pleasure, more enjoyment, more fun, and not be quite as in integrity in our leadership and our authority. So that's something to look at. And at this point, we know Mercury is now forward moving in Aslacia, and Venus is now debilitated in Virgo. So there might be a lot more issues that come up in terms of our relationships with other people at this exact point by the end of the month. But I will get into that a little more in future videos. I wanted to just touch on the sun's move for now, because it really is a big step for us to move out of the place where the sun's been in Cancer. And I know a lot of people follow the tropical zodiac and kind of believe the sun has already been in Leo, and they're wondering why they're having all these issues that feel more emotional as opposed to really feeling embodied in their power. And the reason is because the places of power have actually been relational planets of Venus and Mercury. And it's not just Mercury retrograde. That's actually been a little bit of a blessing in all of this. And that's why it's causing rifts and issues in our relations with other people. Whereas the sun stepping into his own sign really starts to bring us into that state of embodied power where we don't have to assert it as much because we just are it. So I hope this has been helpful for you. I will, like I said, be doing a full moon video very soon for that upcoming event where we sort of reflect on the opposite energy of that in Aquarius. And if you want to know how the sun is showing up for you in Leo and what house Leo is for you, and also how that relates to the Venus and the Mercury and the Mars, because I really talk about those things in my weekly forecast, you can check out the forecast for all 12 signs and see how this is affecting you at patreon.com/Radha Home Astrology. Talk to you soon. Aloha.